Hi, welcome to Find My Team Conversations. My name is Barb Smith, and we have a great topic today. Most of the time when we do these Find My Team conversations, it's in and around sports and the recruiting process, and sometimes we venture out. And this is a topic that, sometimes it's hard to discuss this topic, the racism topic. It's hard to talk about it, but we want to be able to bring people to the table and maybe come up with some tools that we can use to keep our sports clean, to keep our schools clean, and to have everybody, having a great experience while they're there. And this goes on into college as well. The experience of sport can teach us so many things. And I'm not sure it's actually doing that like it used to be. So we have two experts here. And I'm so thankful for both Torrance and Tracy to be here. And I'll just do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to ask you all to add to that if there's anything that would be beneficial that you can add. First of all, Tracy Buford. Tracy is from Minnesota, and so lived through the George Floyd incident, and also played college and high school sports, basketball. I think you played other sports too, maybe. You can tell us in a minute. Yeah. But she also was a high school coach and a club coach, a travel coach. And so she's had numerous years of experience with student athletes, in particular female student athletes. And also she's the mom of two daughters who also went through the recruiting process and who also have run up against some issues that deal with racism. Right now, in case you're all interested and want to hire her, she's a IT specialist and a business analyst, currently working for Be the Match as their IT specialist in human resources. And then we have Torrance Hill, who also is in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, also saw the increase of racial incidences happening throughout the high schools. Torrance was also an athlete in high school and college, and he also coached both in high school and at the college level. And now he's an athletic director, an assistant athletic director in the Minneapolis Public Schools. And so some of the incidences of just racism that happened throughout Minnesota, even this past year, he's very aware of and had to deal with some of that. So I bring these two here because they're experts on this topic. They have lived long enough to, no offense to anybody, lived long enough to have some interactions and some understanding and some wherewithal with this topic. So Tracy, I'm going to start with you to add anything that I may have missed.
I think you covered it all. Yeah, that pretty much sums up me, I think. The only thing I think is worth adding is I do come from a unique background, I feel like, right? So being a white girl, if you will, just growing up in a community where, I played with majority of Black girls and I, was heavily involved in the Black community. And then of course just moving and actually transitioning from that high school and childhood experience to college where it was all white. And even me being white, that sounds funny, but it was out of my comfort zone, and then of course just to add that my husband is Black, obviously my children are Black, so just have a pretty unique perspective, I guess, compared to most of your average white people, I guess I would say. I jokingly tell my kids that, from the outside, I look like a old white lady, but that's not who I feel like. So.
I love that, and thanks for sharing that. This is why this is such a great topic, and that you need to be in this conversation. Okay, thank you for that. Torrance, please add anything that I messed up or forgot.
No, you didn't mess up anything. Everything was pretty on point. I would probably add to it that my experience as a high school and college athlete were both at predominantly Black schools. And my experience within the diversity piece as a administrator has all been at the high school and college level. And so that's where I began to really comprehend uh, the racism, the differences, the discrimination, both on the male and the female side, both on the black and the white side, both on the suburban and the urban side, so forth and so on. So I pretty much grew into this understanding experience as I became further into my athletic director career.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a little story and then some points, and then we'll end with the same stuff after we go through the questions. So I was recently talking to a student athlete, and I just said, "Hey, are you experiencing racism in your school?" And she said, "Oh yeah, it's everywhere. It's the teachers, it's the coaches, and we just get used to it. We just know who has those views, and we just kind of steer around those people in our everyday life." So I'll just hold that thought right there and then just ask three things, which you don't have to answer now. We'll bring it back at the end of this. But is racism so prevalent that we've become immune to it and we learn how to, fishtail around it? Or are we oblivious to it and not sure when we see it happening, not sure that it's racism or how to catch it? Or number three, we just don't care. So those three things, we'll come back at the end and just talk about those. Are we fishtailing around? We're immune to it? Are we oblivious to it happening, or we just don't care? So with that, I'll go into the first question here. And Tracy, I'll just start with you, and I'll go back and forth with that. So you don't always have to be the one starting.
It's okay.
Why do you think racism and racial tension is an issue in school and particularly in sports? And what are the main causes in your opinion?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say that these are very loaded questions that you gave, which are awesome. And I'm just going to be really blunt about it. So there's going to be no, sugarcoating, beating around the bush. I mean, basically for me, it's because like everywhere else in our society, it's deep rooted, in our systems, including education. So that's just going to spill out in school, in sports. And, for me, it comes down to ignorance. That's what I see mostly. And, there's three types of ignorance that people kind of mention, which is like factual, which is the absence of knowledge of a fact, right? Which is true. So I think if you think about racial groups, there's facts that they don't know about each other, right? So their absence of that knowledge. There's object, right? So you're not acquainted with some object. So again, that applies too, because there's groups that even in 2022, they're really not acquainted with each other. They really, they're not involved as a community together. So they're missing that piece. And then, the last one that you wouldn't think of really is technical, which is, the absence of knowledge on how to do something. And I was thinking about that and I'm like, well, that's exactly what it is. People don't know what to do. So I understand, kind of this ignorance and how it is. But now how do I change that, and it's all about, for me, it's education. I mean, people have to make a point to educate themselves, and it has to be intentional. And I just think that for so many areas, it's not. It's just, you follow what your parents, perspective is, or what you're taught. And all of these things, let's be clear, they're all taught. None of us are born with these perspectives, right? So I think that really, it really comes, like I said, it's really systematic. It's deep rooted in our environment.
Well, speaking of education, then Torrance, do you want to add anything there? That's a great answer, Tracy.
No, everything she said was definitely true. There's nothing to add to it to make it be more clear than how she said it. I think if anything, I would add that we as adults, because now we're all adults and we have kids under us, we have to be honest with ourselves on exactly what it is, what's happening, what's going on, what it was in the past, to communicate that information to our kids, their friends, our grandkids, nieces, nephews, neighbors, so forth and so on. I think that's also the missing piece, is that there's no communication of what has already occurred or why is this happening here in 2022. And once we went to this past year, particularly here in Minneapolis, this past year, well, actually it's 2 years now, you can still hear and see and read issues and events and comments and experiences that are still repeating themselves. And you just ask yourselves, why is this still going on? Why are we still talking about the same thing? Why do we still have to explain this to you? So forth, so on. So at some point in time, again, adults just had to be honest with the situation and just explain or communicate it out to the kids to get them to comprehend this is what this is and this is how we can correct it moving forward. Hopefully it can become better instead of just repeating the same cycle year after year after decade after decade.
Well, as you're both talking, I'm thinking if we went earlier, like go before high school, and how is it affecting our youth? Do they get to high school and then realize there's issues, or is it like you were talking systemic? You're kind of getting it from your parents and things, but how is it affecting the youth? Because that comes into the high school. Torrance, how about you start with this one?
I think at the youth level, if we're talking K-8, within the high school itself, we don't have, I can't speak for all the school districts, obviously. But the information isn't being taught within the school as an information, meaning the history of what it is and where it began and how it got to that point. As we all know, a lot of districts and states have eliminated some books, being discussed or taught. Libraries no longer, contain this literature information within their buildings. And then you have, those teachers in particular classrooms that just either don't want to talk about it, don't know how to talk about it, are unfamiliar with the experiences. And so if you're going through that, K-8 is what? Age 5 to age 13, you're pretty much lacking experience on where racism really is. Now then when you get to high school, depending upon where you go, if you go to all black school, okay, well then I'm used to being around, African Americans all the time. But if mom and dad decides to put you into suburban or private, now that dynamic changes and you have to make an adjustment to something that you've never seen for the first 13 years of your life. So who do you have to ask, how do I do this and why? No one, because no one told you prior to the age of 14, and now no one's around you at 14 to tell you how to deal with it. So I think within our school system first, we have to go back to teaching exactly the history of the country, talking about that, kids learning that, and then as they grow older, at least mentally they are aware of, okay, this is what occurred, this is really going on, this is how I can handle this, and I can talk to a classmate because they went through the same thing with me in this particular class. Whereas, again, now if they went through that before, now there's something new later on in life, they're completely unprepared to deal with the situation that's actually, unfortunately, it's probably going to get worse if they stay in that scenario or that environment.
Tracy, you want to add?
Yeah, I can just add to that, just that it's so true. And I will say teach true, correct history. I mean, let's be honest, like my husband and I talk about it all the time. The things that we've learned in the last 10 years, we have to unravel everything that was embedded in us, everything that we were brainwashed to learn that is not true. Sorry. I mean, it's not. So, these kids, especially when we talk about, elementary, we're molding these kids. And if you start them off with all the wrong information, that doesn't help. So first of all, get the correct, true information in the kids in front of them. But, I really think that what is so, what's affecting them the most today it's in their face all the time, you know, whether it's social media, news, you know, just in the community, it's a headline everywhere. Race is, you know, a part of everything that we do now, especially that, you know, we talk about so many things, of course, like George Floyd, like you mentioned, but yeah, it definitely, I think it just affects them in so many different ways than, you know, especially compared to us.
And speaking of these teachers, do you think that teachers, do they feel their hands are tied, that they can't do this work, or are they afraid themselves? Are they not knowledgeable? You mentioned earlier, Torrance, that maybe there's not training for some things. What do you guys think about the state of, I mean, teachers are jumping out, they're jumping ship, a lot of them, you know, a mass exodus of teachers, not just because of this topic, but there are some issues there.
Mhm.
How can we empower those teachers?
And Torrance is much more the expert on this, obviously, than I am. But I feel like I have a strong opinion about this because what I've seen so much is that we have so many educators that they cannot relate to their student population. And that's a huge issue. And whatever level you want to address it on, whether it's the district or the school or what have you, it has to change because these you know, teachers cannot relate. And I've you know, personally been involved, whether as a coach or as a parent, you know, where I'm blown away at just their inability to handle certain situations, you know, and it's just a lack of, you know, training and education on their part. And you know, that's to me where it just, you know, it kind of reminds me of like when police departments say, you know, you have to live in the community in order to police there, right? It's similar to that, but I mean, I don't know that that's necessary, but you know, they have to be able to relate to their student population.
Yeah.
No, she hit it on the head. It would be beneficial if you put a young white female, even a young white male teacher into a predominantly Black community in high school, that they're familiar with that neighborhood, that community, those kids. That way you get a better understanding of what they deal with every day, which then would change your approach on how you're going to teach them within your class. And it's no different if you put a young Black male or female in a suburban environment at high school or a private school for that matter. It's the same thing. They would have to be, they need to be around that on a regular basis to actually comprehend that dynamic. And both dynamics are completely different. Like on the urban side, you're dealing with a lot of socioeconomic situations. You know, most of those families, most of our families are not educated, as in that kid in high school is probably gonna be the first one to graduate either from high school or goes to college. And on the other side, suburban area, you're probably dealing with a lot of kids and families who may be financially well off. Mom and dad are very educated. Mom and dad are in the business world. Mom and dad works. There's a mom and dad in your house. Like there's a completely different dynamic on both sides that the teacher needs to understand for them just to get their message and lesson across. And so it's no different dealing with this particular topic. If you have more understanding of it and that whatever that demographic is, then you'll be able to handle it better. But if you don't, you know, now you're a fish in shallow water. You're gonna drown.
Hmm. So when these kids are walking around school, elementary and high school, are they, this is a legit question, like I don't know the answer to this, but are they seeing mixed race gatherings of their adults in the room, or are those also, you know, at a game or something, the Black people are over here and the white people are over here and the whatever Asian people are over here, or are they, do the student athletes get to see the intertwining of the staff regardless of race?
I think at the lower level, I don't think the kids notice it. I don't even think the kids do that consciously. Low level meaning kindergarten through 8th grade, maybe 6th, but we're going to say the 8th grade. From my experiences dealing with high school kids, it's as clear as day. If a kid told you that I don't notice that the suburban kids sit at these 3 tables in the left corner, and the urban area kids sit these 3 tables in the right corner, and the athletes sit over here by the door, and the smart kids sit by the cafeteria table. If a kid tells you that in high school, then he's lying, because high schools are clearly there's a division, there's a line drawn, there's a particular group I'm going to stay with, particularly at lunchtime. The opposite I can't do in the classroom, and maybe do it in the hallways in between classes. But no, in high school, we all are aware of who's with what group and why. In elementary, those kids are probably, Susie's in my class, Susie's in my gym class, she rides my bus, I'm going to stay with Susie. The color piece, I don't think is as knowledgeable or comprehended for a little kid compared to adolescent or teenagers. That's just my opinion on it.
So at some point that starts changing. Okay, well, let's move to the coaches then. Okay, so now we're in high school, and the coaches, again, coaches have been under so much pressure and stress through the pandemic. It was, teachers and coaches alike trying to figure out if they were going to play or not, having people have to get tested and all that. And now they're coming out of that. And just talking about Minnesota, this is across the country, but in your experience in Minnesota, the racial tension that exists in sport, in the high school sports, what these coaches are dealing with and what these kids are dealing with, do you have a sense of that? And again, the cause of that, the root of that?
Just for me, I don't know what the root of it is. I believe at the high school level, particularly here in Minnesota, and this isn't the only state, because I've worked in Wisconsin, which is across the state line, and I worked in Ohio when I first became athletic director at the high school level. Here in particular, I think the fan base, as you go outside of your urban area, i.e. Minneapolis and St. Paul, so the cities outside of those 2 cities, there's a lacking of people of color. And so therefore, if you aren't around it, you don't understand it, you don't talk to it, you don't see it. So when you do come across it, whatever you've grown to know that this is what that particular group is already in your mind. And what you hear from anybody else or seeing TV that is saying it is something the opposite, you aren't going to believe that. And so in particular, from my experience in these particular states, Wisconsin and Minnesota, hockey is one of those sports where there's a dynamic that obviously it is not, predominantly of people of color playing or attending the game. And so when we had those issues this past year with things being said during the game or things being written on the signs, posted at the game, that's a problem. That how does a coach handle that? Or how does a parent handle their child for saying or writing this on the board? My thing has always been, as an AD, all the thing I can control, number one, are my spectators. And so there needs to be some type of code of conduct or accountability for the individuals that are caught saying or doing those things, because you can't allow your student body to verbally harass another individual, and then all we do is send a mass email out to the other school apologizing and saying we'll take care of it within our school walls. Well, I don't. What does take care of me? And how do I know that you did that? 2 weeks or 2 months later. And why did the kid do what he said or do how he wrote it anyway? Like he didn't just decide to do this Friday night at the game. Like this has had to be something he's done some other time and what happened the previous time. So I think it starts off, at least at my level as an AD in a particular building, with my student body and what our code of conduct is. And then we go from student body, code of conduct, to the staff, to the parents, and then the culture of the school. I think all that combined leads to or can stop what those actions have been, particularly race-wise, within your school, at your sporting events with your students.
Yeah, and I can just add to that and say that, we all know coaching is a thankless job. It's a really tough job. And, the thing of it is that coaches know their players though, right? Of anything else, they know their players. They have a really good understanding of who they are, where they come from. And the thing that, coaches might not realize that I don't want to call it control over, but they kind of have tentacles, that go out to the parents, right? So they hear and see what their parents do on a lot of levels. And that gets repeated from the kid, as a coach, when that child is talking, and exactly when it's coming exactly from that parent. Because you can just see the parent, but it's really coming out of the child's mouth. But it's really, that's exactly what the parent told the child. So they really have an influence, I feel, over sometimes more than what they think. There's certain things, Torrance is talking about, like a code of conduct. There are certain things as a coach or as if you're like me, I can relate it to being in a club environment, right? You're not going to accept certain things. You're just, you're going to be on a certain level where it's like, we're not going to put up with that either from other teams or spectators, and nor are we gonna allow our team or our parents to do things like that. So it is creating that culture, to where you're aware of what's going on, because you do have a pulse, into really what's happening, and really trying to address it, as early as possible.
Well, as you were saying, both of you, that a lot of this, stems from the earlier ages or the parents. What can parents do to maybe start erasing these beliefs that come through their child? What can they do? I know you had mentioned educate yourself, Tracy, before. And no matter what race you are, can parents have more of an effect than they're having right now?
Huge. And again, I like passionate about this, so I can speak loud and proud about this. First and foremost, white parents almost never teach their kids how to deal with race. It's just a norm that happens within their home that they don't realize. So real quick, I'll give you an example. I worked with a coworker who has a white family, and they live way out in the suburbs. And she came to work, and she thought this story was so funny to tell me, that they had a black salesman come to the door. And long story short, the salesman, looked at their big, beautiful house and said, "Oh, I'd love to live here." He's trying to connect with the kids and whatnot. And her daughter looked at him and said, "You can't live here." And he's like, and just not realizing what she was going to say. He said, "Oh, why can't I live here?" And she goes, "Because you're brown." And I'm just like, and my coworker, just is like, "I didn't teach her that." I said, "Yeah, but you didn't teach her that. She learned that from being in your environment. I don't know what you're doing, right? But you're not teaching her what is right, And so they have to actively play a role, And I have another story that, I have a coworker that grew up in rural Minnesota, And she has two really small children. And it is so refreshing to hear her say, you know what, this is around the George Floyd situation. I haven't been around Black people. I'm not familiar with the culture, but I don't want my kids to grow up and not understand and not be good people and and all this. So she is really making an effort to teach her kids how to be allies and advocates and all those things, right? That has to be taught. It can't be an assumed thing that you think that your kids are learning if you're not actively teaching them. It goes back to the phrase like, oh, I'm not a racist, or I'm not colorblind. Those phrases might have been okay in the 80s, but now we know that there's so much more that we know that's not okay. That's not enough. You have to be an advocate, so I think that's huge. And I think all white parents need to understand that they need to be teaching their children. And if they don't know how, then go learn how, right? There's plenty of resources. And I think that the thing of it is that so many of them are, and I find this because that's why I said I'm in a unique situation, because white people will talk to me because I'm white, right? But I can tell them all the things I know about Black culture, and they're okay to ask me because they feel comfortable, but they might not feel comfortable with Torrance because they're like, oh my God, he's Black. I don't know if I should ask him this, but the one of the beauties of 2022 is that we are talking about it. At least, back when we were young, we just didn't talk about it. We all knew it was there, but we just acted like it wasn't there. So yeah, talk about it, have the conversation, and I think the same is true for people of color, right? So they have, as a parent, and I can relate, that they had their own experiences, and they carry all their baggage, and believe me, they have plenty, so they have all that to carry with them that they want to instill in their kids. Like they want to teach them, like Torrance was saying earlier, this is the history, this is what happened, you need to be aware of how we got here today. But in the same respect, be very careful not to change their perspective or really influence, how they feel about that white suburban kid, or, and believe me, it's not easy to do. It has to be intentional. I find myself, I'm guilty myself, of doing the same thing, because you make assumptions about people. But I'm trying very hard with my grandkids to not really influence them in ways that I really find myself that I did a lot with my own kids. So there's just so much there that they can be such a huge impact, and they don't realize how much, I don't think.
Wow, we need to get this group on tour around the country. That's pretty powerful right there. And yeah, so coming from your heart, you can tell there's some passion there. And
Sorry.
no, don't be. It's awesome. It's what's needed. Like you said, we're coming to the table. I'm sorry, Torrance, did you want to add? I see a lot of head nodding there, like you are in agreement.
No, parents are very significant, and we all are in what our kids do in their life. So I mean that to me, that's almost like common sense. But she definitely touched on, unfortunately, there's some parents that they aren't going to teach that. They aren't going to talk about it to the kids. I don't have enough white friends to know what their household is with inside their walls. I'm not going to give an opinion on what I think is going on. I can just go off of what I see working with white student athletes and working with white families as an AD and as a former coach for that matter, some sports. What I know on the African American side, when I grew up, which was, I'm 52 now, so growing up in the 70s, mom and dad taught us, both myself and my two sisters. I distinctly remember dad telling us all the time, you have to be better than. You can't be as good as. And he wasn't talking about our next door neighbor. I knew exactly who he was talking about. And that's always been ingrained in our heads. And as we got older, we began to see how the world moved and how the world dealt with us in a variety of ways. I don't think this generation, as in youth, is getting that same conversation. And I'm not saying that conversation was the right one to have, because obviously that the one that my dad had now has got our minds like, okay, it's just us and them. Like there was no in between. No, it's just this is how this is going to go, and it shouldn't be that 100%. But then that's what we've grown into now. It's black and white. There is no gray. No one else of color matters besides us. We don't understand, or not we. They don't understand what we went through because it's us. That's just the mindset that we grew up with. I think we need to raise our kids to actually open their eyes and their ears on what's going on, be willing to comprehend it and then talk about it. Because if they don't, then they're going to be in the same situation that we're in right now, 30, 40 years later. Because honestly, prior to George Floyd, we didn't talk about it. As Tanya said, it wasn't a topic of conversation. It might have been in the black household because a black man was beat up or murdered by a police officer. Okay, that wasn't being talked. That same event wasn't going to be talked about in the white household. It just wasn't, at least not to the depth that it was in our household. But now, after the George Floyd situation, even Breonna Taylor, also, a lot more people of every color and race have talked about it, have seen it, have read the news articles, have watched Attorney Crump on IG on the news every single week. It's a different story, but the same characters are in the same play. Now it's being talked about. So we really have to emphasize as parents that our kids talk about it, be open about it, either with us or with your friends or with your coworkers or whoever. But it has to be some type of conversation and wonder why this happened. How can we get past it? How can we improve it? Instead of just not saying anything and it's going to repeat itself 20, 30 years from now.
One blessing from my career, both as a college player, high school player, college player, and as a coach who has coached all over the country, is the fact that I've gotten to witness and be a part of different races, different people from different country even, and different races coming together and having the one purpose of winning, coming together. And to me, that upbringing was the best education I could have ever asked for, because I got to be in there. I got to see it. I got to make friends with different people than me. And it is where I come from in terms of this issue on racism. And I'm not perfect. I don't have it down. I still have biases. I know that, it's still happening, but the fact that I got to see that and have that kind of exposure is a blessing that I'm not sure many people get to have. And what a great education that could be if we could give it to everybody.
Exactly.
Great.
That's exactly well said. And I feel the same way too, Barb. That's why I say I feel very unique in my situation, right? I know that I was not brought up like most, middle-class white folks. I mean, I just wasn't. And so it is a blessing, and it's a great thing to be able to, even like for my kids, to raise them in a, diverse environment and, get exposure to all different types of people. So I think for, the outliers, especially, in rural Minnesota, especially, I mean, they don't really have those opportunities, but they can. So, I've seen different teams really reach out. One in particular, there was a team in Wisconsin that, small rinky-dink town in the middle of nowhere, but they would come to the cities to play. And, they were much different, so now when they get on the AAU circuit and they go play teams from down south, they're not, frozen on the court like, oh my gosh, so yeah, like I said, it has to be an intentional effort to do that, and I say rural Minnesota, but jokingly, I mean, you go second ring suburbs from the Twin Cities and it's pretty white. So so you don't have to go too far even.
So let's put it in the hands of the coaches, just their part in all of this. And talking about this exposure piece, is there something that the coaches could do to do this sort of this work, and would they be willing to do it, first of all? But are there things that they could do to really help the situation within their schools? Because if they do it in their schools and help it in their schools, it's gonna affect the entire community and the surrounding communities.
I think at the high school level, and I realized this when I became a college coach compared to when I was a high school coach. And you know this, Barb. A college coach, you have a lot more control of what you want to do with your program. It pretty much is you're the head of the whole snake. You run that show from August all the way to May. And if the kids go home for the summer, if they stay with you, then you got them for a whole 12 months. So you dictate what they're going to do, where they're going to go, what time you're going to do it, when I'm going to see you, when I'm not going to see you. Like, that's just how colleges run.
Right.
And in high school, it's completely opposite. The coach may be in the building, but if he's in the building, you're only really seeing him, during the season. After the season, you rarely see coach unless you got conditioning coming up. Otherwise, you don't see coach anymore until summer league and next fall. So that, I think that's one piece that's going to be difficult. Two, a lot of coaches at the high school level don't want to do anything else but coach. They don't want to deal with anything outside of basketball or football or baseball. I just want to be X and O's, practice, game, go home. And so when these issues come up, they don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And if you hear a player talking about it, or players plural talk about it, they hush it, they shut it down. That's not, we're not doing it right now. It's basketball practice, right? For 2 hours, we're doing basketball. We're not talking about anything else that just happened in the school fourth period. Unfortunately, that's how most of our high school coaches are. And so I think what we need to do, and I'm saying we as an AD, our athletic directors in the buildings need to communicate with their staff, or even create a staff that is about culture and family and the betterment or development, not betterment, but development of our male and female student athletes. If an incident occurs in the building, or it occurs within a team or at a sporting event, I think it needs to be talked about immediately amongst your coaching staff. Okay, this occurred here. How do we discuss this amongst our athletes at our school so that doesn't happen again, or how we can better handle it moving forward if it does happen? And then from that moment on, you just build on it. Either you build on it once a month, or you build on it every 6 months, but there has to be some type of meeting, communication, captain's meeting, however you want to put it, to whereas once that event happened, whenever it happened, from that moment on, we're going to talk about this and make it a teaching moment for everybody within the athletic department. Because if we leave it up to the coaches, in my opinion, it's not going to happen. They aren't going to talk about it at all.
That's a great point. That's a great point. I mean, I know when I was a coach, it was, your job's on the line. You got to win the next game. Yeah, and you got to focus in here. Kids, get along so we can win. But there were sometimes these conversations that did come up, and when they did, I felt so honored that they came up, because I know that even across the country, the adults aren't having these conversations. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the solution is, but communities, parents, athletic directors, coaches, the adults, should somehow, I think, maybe help, from the elementary on up, just to try to keep the walls down between people and keep this communication going and have these teachable moments, as you're saying. Is that even, am I living a fantasy world here? Is this even possible?
I think it's possible. I really think it's possible. I mean, all those were great points, but and it's like things that I keep using the word intentional because that's just what keeps coming back to me is you really have to create that culture, and it can be done. But it takes that coach. Unfortunately, they're not paid a lot of money. We get it, but most coaches, I like to say most, maybe I'm being generous, but they care more about the paycheck, right? Because if it was about the pay, they wouldn't be doing it. They really care about these kids and what they're doing, and if that's the case, then you really need to go outside your comfort level, and whether it's you're an urban school and you reach out to a suburban school and say, hey, let's set up a non-conference game, and when we do that, hey, let's have a pregame meal together. It's simple stuff that you would not believe goes a really long way. It really makes a huge difference. And I just think if those people can start connecting and making those kind of interactions happen, that can make a big difference.
Yeah, those are great points. And so let's go right to the athlete now. And what are some things that you both would say if you were speaking to student athletes about this issue, and how to handle this issue within their own schools? So even if it's it doesn't matter if it's all white, all black, or mixed somehow, or other races too. I don't mean to just say there's only two, but
Mhm.
with the interactions of these teams, no matter what the makeup of the teams are, how can the student athletes, educate themselves and be more open-minded about what's going on?
I think a lot of our youth now are very aware, or what not want to say very, not a lot. They try to be more informed uh, of what's going on. I think they really make an effort, particularly our suburban area kids, um, to try to be more empathetic
Mm,
with
that's a good
with
word.
our minority students on their team, even in their building for that matter. When things happen, that's a step because that wasn't happening when I was younger. I don't know how old Tracy is, but that was definitely not happening when I was younger. I think too is that they can become more informed on, as we talked about earlier, on what racism is. Um, where did it start at? Why is it here? Why do they feel this way about us? How long have they had this feeling about us being society, us being white America? Because again, that's not being told to them in the classroom or at home. And if it is being told to them at home, it's one side of the two story. And so if they're only getting one side of it, then they need to take upon themselves to get that second side. And that's not a conversation I don't think a teenager is going to have with their teammate or the classmate of color, because that may be kind of awkward to ask that question. And so to take it upon themselves, just take a step further. And now since they have online, you just Google a story, an incident, an individual, a news article, whichever it may be, just to get more information about what it is, what it was, how it's going to be, and then they can move and grow with it. But again, I think now that you've now at least have taken a step to be more considerate and empathetic to the people of color, particularly those on their team or in their school building.
Yeah, I definitely think that has, definitely been an improvement. Because you're right. No, back in my day, that was not the case at all. Um, and I think that, as the student athlete, I think that they can demand things of the adults, right? It's, students are very, very powerful. And I think sometimes they realize that, but it's really, creating an environment that they feel comfortable in. And they can speak up and, try to make things happen. And it would be, I would suggest, because the thing that I found is what I love about the kids nowadays, I'll say, I sound like an old person, is that they're really creative, right? They're more independent thinkers, I feel like, than we were. And they have a lot of ideas. So don't be afraid to, not just complain about something like, oh, this is happening, but what would you do about it? The adults need to be aware enough to say, how can we help you? How can we change that for you? How can we make things different or better? I don't think the adults are asking those questions, but I think for the student, demand that of whether it's your teachers, your coaches, your admin at school, whatever. Schools need to start thinking about creating, BIPOC alliance groups, the Black, Indigenous, people of color, some groups that can help educate the school and help, build inclusive, environment. So I think that just, being a student athlete, I think that you have a lot more power than you realize. And, don't be afraid to speak up as a group and, let your ideas be known on what you think might help or, might improve your situation where you are.
Hey, I think that end there, that what you said there at the end is really important, because I think that when a student athlete goes to talk to a coach or goes to talk to an AD or goes to talk to anybody in the school, first of all, Torrance, I'll let you answer this in a minute. If they go to their coach and the coach is saying, let's just play and forget about all that, where else can they go? But when they do find somebody, if they have solutions, I think that's always a more powerful, conversation. If they can come up with something that suggests that we have an idea for change that will help our school, versus just coming and complaining about it, because that is, we do. I mean, I find myself sometimes complaining about something and don't have a solution. That's not a great, leadership role in my, situation, or an adult move, so to speak. But if we can teach kids how to be solution thinkers, we might be able to, have a little bit more of an impact. So back to my question before, if they don't have a place to go in the school, or at least with their coaches, where else can they go? Where is the safe space? Is there one?
Individual wise, it should be your administrators, your athletic director if you're an athlete. If you're a non-athlete, your principal, your assistant principal, your guidance counselor. I know some schools, but not all high schools, have an individual in the building who handles or assumes the role of diversity. But I don't know if every school district offers that. Hopefully, again, your school has what we call it in college, and some high schools have it. AAC was a student athlete advisory council. To whereas maybe that every team is represented, but at least you have, maybe 10 to 15 student athletes, grades 9 through 12 of all your sports, who just meet twice a month, once a month, to talk about issues or problems or how they can advance athletics in the school and just make their school better. That would be a sounding board for them to go to with a particular topic of issue that they can't find anyone else to talk to about, and let those be your voice. Maybe your student government, SGA, is also an option to put that on the table. There should be some organization in the building, if not an individual, who can help them understand it, communicate it, and, as you said, create a solution to solve it, hopefully. Now, if there isn't, then we have a problem, which is why we probably have these problems these past over 200, 400 years right now, because there's no one in the building to go to with it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, we're running short on time here, so I just want to kind of do a just sort of a summary and then I'll get to these last 3 points that we started with. But really quick, in your minds, just to sum up, advice to high school coaches on how to address and deal with the racial issues that are going on in the high school? Tracy.
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, be aware and be a listener. And make sure that you're making yourself available to all of your student athletes, and you're taking action on what you're hearing and what's going on, and you're trying to create that positive environment that we've been talking about.
Torrance.
Be informed, be honest, be fair, and always look in the mirror when things happen.
Yes.
Be look in the mirror when things occur. Don't point a finger first. Look in the mirror first, and then ask yourself whatever that question is, and then you figure out how you're going to move to the next step.
Great answers, you guys. Great answers. Okay, just as quick advice that you would give parents in dealing with racial issues.
Start early with your kids. Stay consistent with the information. And again, be honest with yourself on what it really is, what you thought it was, and what it should be moving forward when you're going to have that communication with the kids, with your family, and with your coworkers, for that matter also.
Yeah, and I would say, don't be afraid that you don't know everything. There's so much that you don't know. That's fine. Go seek the information that you need, right? So that you can empower your kids appropriately. And you're not the only one, so just be aware to go out and seek the right knowledge, I would say.
Excellent. And then for student athletes, same question, what's your advice for student athletes? We kind of ended with this, but just a summary, a wrap up.
Yeah, so I would say kind of what I just said before, just really for them to, be powerful in their voice and seek, the help that they need, all the resources that Torrance talked about, even your parents, whatever resources you can find to help you, but definitely speak up and use your, whether it's your teammates, your classmates, your siblings, whoever it is, but form that group that you can, pact with, to not do it alone.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of what Tracy said, and I would steal the mantra from the Golden State Warriors: the strength in numbers. You're on the team with a team of 10, a team of 20. You all together will be a strong voice within the community, within your building, within your athletic department, to discuss or talk about whatever just occurred. And I'm sure someone will listen to 20 young women or 20 young men at one time. Someone will have to listen to that. So yeah, I would say stay together with strength in numbers for our student athletes.
Awesome. So, okay, last point, going back to the 3 points that we began with. Are we immune to it? Are we just oblivious to it? Or do we not care? In your opinion, Torrance, you can start with this one. In your opinion, is one of these standing out more than the other? Or is it a mix?
It's a mix, in my opinion. It's definitely a mix of all three. I think it all depends on who you're talking to, where they live, how old they are, what color their skin. All three have existed probably too long within our history. And so until we probably eliminate letter C, where we just we're just blind to it, or I think we don't care, then it'll probably get better. But at least as long as C's there, that option is going to continue to be an issue, and things are going to keep repeating themselves.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. That is right on the money. If we can get rid of C, then we can work on A and B. But yeah, it exists everywhere. Depends on the demographics and yeah.
Well, I think you two have said so many important things, and I can't wait to get this out there. I hope high schools pick it up. I hope athletic directors pick it up, and I hope, programs pick it up, even parents. I think it's important information, and, we can all do more if we can all be more open and just, come to the table with an open mind, as you all have advocated. We can all be, advocates for change in this area and help these kids. Mostly it's our kids, that we can help them have better experiences and learn this stuff early enough so that we don't even have to have Find My Team conversations like this.
Agreed.
Thank you both so much. Really, really appreciate your time and your input and your insight and your expertise. Just really, Find My Team thanks you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you for the invite. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, we will keep this conversation going for sure. Thank you both. And thanks to all the listeners at Find My Team.